FM, Alisa Melekhina here, and welcome to my DVD on creative chess. I'm going to cover imbalances, which includes everything from pawns for minor pieces, as in this first part, to the popular exchange sacrifice, and the complex minor pieces for a queen. The goal is to encourage you to think about the value of pieces in a different way, not merely based on the static values that we all grew up with. For example, we all learned that a pawn is worth 1, a rook 5, a queen 9. Well, those are useful guidelines, but at this point you've realized that there are exceptions to every rule, and chess is a lot deeper than that. The most beautiful games are in fact the ones that involve sacrificing and mixing up the symmetry of the position. That is something that comes with experience, and the ability to decide when to execute one of those sacrifices is also something that computers can't help with as much because they're limited in their ability to play creatively and evaluate imbalanced positions. So let's get started in exploring the different imbalances that can arise in chess. I'll get us warmed up with one of the most simple imbalances, which involves sacrificing 2 pawns for a piece. This usually arises if you need to sacrifice to defend or to get attacking chances and start a pawn storm. Now the first game is going to be one of my own games from the US Women's Championships this year against WGM Sabine Feuser. It's a good example of how the pawns can be neutralized and what happens if you're not careful. So I'm white here, and I covered this opening in another video for OCL on the advanced French. So I like to play this rare knight bd2 gambit. Now Sabine played knight f5, which is an unusual reply, and you can check out that other video for the more typical ways to play here, which usually involve knight c6 or knight takes f3. But the knight is actually misplaced on f5 and in fact takes the spot of the other knight, which usually aims to go to f5 from e7 or h6. So I managed to kick the knight out. Okay, using that d4 square because I sacrificed the pawn so that my pieces could get more activity. Okay, and now black starts to retreat and try and place her pieces on better squares. Okay, knight b5, a typical idea, aiming to go knight d6 and taking advantage of the fact that black can't castle yet because she had to spend another tempo going back to g8. Okay, d4 square is excellent for the bishop. Now I could try and go knight d6 now, but it's too early to do something like this. And black gets counterplay, and she was never planning on castling kingside anyway, so I don't need to give her the counterplay that she was looking for. Instead, I decide to go queen g3 here, preparing knight d6. Now she surprises me with h5, and I'm wondering who's attacking who in this position. Now I go knight d6. And she essentially has to take it. Okay, so this is the critical position in this game. When I was calculating this, I thought she would go knight c8. And here would have a decisive advantage. Alternatively, I thought she may have been planning knight g6, but then I can take on g6. Retreat to bishop d4, and again, I'm better. But she realized that she would be worse in both of those alternatives, so she decided to play the surprising h takes g4, which really caught me off guard, and I was wondering if she had maybe miscalculated or just expected me to take back immediately, because I can take the knight, and I'm also attacking the queen. So she has to take back. I can take the pawn back on g4, and she has 2 pawns for a piece, but the black king is still exposed, and I'm better here. So you would think that white is winning, but I misplayed this, and we're going to analyze what happened here and how 2 black's pawns became really powerful. So I should have kept the advantage instead of allowing black to mobilize her pawns. She played king d7. As is typical in the French, the king is difficult to reach in the center, especially on that d7 square. But my mind was still focused on the attack. although I needed to realign my thinking here and cash in on my material advantage. And we were both getting low on time, and unfortunately I wasn't able to readjust my mindset from gambit mode to conversion mode because I should have simply taken the other pawn, but I was unsure about allowing her extra counterplay. So the trick here is that after f5 I needed to see bishop e2, and after f takes g4 I don't take back, and I simply hold that position. The key here is that I have control of the e5 square, and her pawns can't move anywhere. Instead of taking on g7, I continued bishop b5, although I shouldn't have focused on exchanging that bishop, but of course I think I'm material up, so an endgame favors me. Now after f6, black has somewhat consolidated, and it's still tough for me to force a breakthrough. So she provokes me into weakening my king, and after queen b4 I started panicking because suddenly everything is hanging. So the correct move here, well, why don't you pause for a second and think about what the right continuation is. Well, the correct move is rook fd1, and it holds everything, and I shouldn't be worried about her taking on b5 because of this amazing f5 breakthrough. Bishop takes e5, and I'm mating here because threatening to go queen c7 as well as rook c7, queen takes g7, and black can't defend everything. So it's important to realize when playing with imbalances, if you're the one with the extra material advantage, if you have the piece for pawns, then you always have the option of sacrificing it back, and because you have the extra piece, you can create more opportunities to do so. So instead of holding on to a material advantage, which is mostly theoretical, if I think I have 3.5, which is a bishop for 2 pawns, I shouldn't think that way. I should think, how can I maximize the activity of my pieces? So I should have been on the lookout for ways to get a better position, even at the cost of sacrificing back material. So it's important not to get too attached to your material advantage in imbalanced positions. Instead, I played queen c3 here, again aiming to exchange into an endgame because I figured I'm up material, and what do we do when we're up material? We exchange. But it was actually a mistake to exchange queens here, and I didn't realize that because I didn't realize how powerful her pawn center was. Now, queen takes c3 wasn't a decisive mistake. The bigger one was that I kept exchanging. I took on c6. And this only reinforced her pawn center. Okay, after king d6, it began to dawn on me that things were starting to go wrong here. So suddenly she's threatening c5 and e5. And it looks like her pawns are going to roll down the board. So I try and activate my king, maybe get control of the h file. But after this innocent move 31, king g2, black is better here. So if we just go back a bit, and you'll see why in a second that I just couldn't stop her pawns from advancing. But this position where it looks like white is completely winning, first of all, my mistake was not taking on g7 here, being too worried about the open g file and not calculating concretely enough, and then exchanging queens when I should have held and put the burden on her to do something in this position. So then we fast forward to this position where it looks like I'm still up material and it's an endgame, but after c5, I start retreating. She gets control of the h file, now the b file, so now I'm really beginning to regret taking the bishop on c6. And after d4, just like that, I went from +3 to -1, so very disheartening to face that over the board in a very important tournament. So I try and hold as much as I can, but it looks like she won't even allow me to sacrifice the bishop back. So I was thinking that I could probably win back both of the pawns and at least force a draw, but she played very accurately in tying down my bishop. So g6 is a good move here because if she gets too hasty and goes e4, I can go rook f5. And then I have these tricks. But g6, very nice prophylactic move, and was played on move 39, right before time control. And after that, no, it's hopeless here. So it looks like I may have simplified into an endgame, but unfortunately I can't take on c5 because of king f3, and I have no checks and I can't stop the mate. So I had to take on f2, and then of course she easily won this pawn ending. So it's not that the sacrifice was sound, giving up the knight on e7, but she realized that as opposed to being outplayed slowly and suffering through that position, she would create an imbalance, and because I didn't handle it properly, it worked out in her favor. Okay, so keep that example in mind. It's a taste of power of two pawns versus a piece, and let's look at another situation in which this arises. So there Sabina did it for defensive resources, so she decided to sacrifice the piece to stop my attack from going. But okay, and this is Warhol, Roy Lopez. So we get to this position, and this is a typical setup. I'm sure you've seen this many times: h6, bishop retreats, and g4, g5. And now whenever you get a position like this, you're always forced to consider whether you want to sacrifice on g5. Now you would sacrifice on g5 usually to try and take advantage of the pin knight, because the queen is usually on d8 and it's hard for her to escape, and especially because the bishop is on b3 controlling the e6 square, it's not like the queen can go to e7 and e6 and escape from the pin. And I decided to take, so this time I was the one that sacrificed the piece for two pawns. And I mainly decided to do that because this bishop on b6 is too far removed from protecting against the pin. If the bishop were able to come to e7, that would have been a different story. But it's not as if I can win back the knight immediately. So this wasn't a tactical sacrifice. This was to create an imbalance, and of course this ruins black's chances of castling. So remember, keep in mind, don't only think about the value of the pawns versus pieces, but think what you're getting in return. So I get very active pieces. I ruin black's chances of castling kingside. It's of course dangerous to castle queenside after playing moves like a6, b5. So that should also be taken into account of your calculations of whether to execute an imbalance. Okay, now I calculated this after rook g8. I'd play h4 to protect the bishop, and also just in case I need to promote the pawn, take advantage of the fact that I have two pawns and make the most of them. Okay, now queen f3 here, rook g6, and black defends. I can't go h5 because the bishop is hanging on g5. So I can't win back the knight immediately, but that's okay. I saw I wouldn't be able to win it back, but I go knight d2. No, I'm minor piece down, so I may as well bring what I have into the game and develop. And that's okay. If you don't see an immediate way to win a piece after a sacrifice, sometimes you just have to take the positional compensation and keep going with it. So he continues to play typical Roy Lopez, knight a5. And he kicks my bishop off the diagonal, so now he opens up the option of going queen e6. Okay, now a3, the interesting move to play, but you'll see why I did that in a second. So after c5, his point was that he's going to go bishop d8 and protect the piece. So I didn't win the piece, but that's okay because I have another type of advantage here. I went f4, open files. Going queen f3 wouldn't have done much, but if I can bring the rook in, then we're talking. Okay, now I go b4. So you see the point of a3. Now I get control of this a file. And the reason I played b4 before playing rook f1 was to hit the f7 pawn. So what I calculated was knight h7, and then I would play bishop b3, which I can do now because there's no longer a knight on a5. Okay, rook g7 doesn't work as a defense because of bishop h6. And if black takes on g5, I simply take on f7 with a check. So black wouldn't have been able to defend on f7, so he went knight g4 instead. But now the knight looks a bit loose. And pause for a second and consider where I went here. Okay, now going bishop b3 here, if you thought of that, would allow him to defend now with rook g7, because then bishop h6 no longer works. So I went rook f5 instead, which he was surprised to see. Oh, and by the way, I'm playing around a 2000 player, and this is from the New York International in 2012. So now he has to take. The knight has nowhere to go. And now this is a preview of an exchange sacrifice for you. So although here it looks like I got a rook for 2 pieces, now it's as if I sacked the exchange for 2 pawns, because remember I sacked a piece for 2 pawns. So I essentially evened out the material count. But black's king is still in danger after everything. So I still retain the advantage here. Okay, aiming for the c5 square. Okay, now you see the power of the extra pawn. Okay, it's a check, so black has to defend the queen. Okay, now we got into an endgame, so it looks like black protected himself from any attack. But I still managed to get it past pawn after all of this. And I'll also have a powerful bishop in a second. Okay, now he made a mistake. He played rook f7, whereas actually black could have been better if he had taken on g2. And then retreated to d5. That's the key. You have to take control of that diagonal, stop my pawn from promoting. But instead, after rook f7, now I go knight e6. And this nice knight maneuver here. And bishop b3 is the key, so now he can't retreat to d5 after taking on g2, and I'm threatening knight e6 and going f7, so he thought he could defend this way, but he missed that. After knight takes h3, I have this fork. So he ended up, after all of that, he ended up losing a piece because he didn't take back. He played rook h5, and the game ended very quickly. Okay, so that was an example of initiating an imbalance to facilitate an attack to stop the black king from castling, and keep in mind to evaluate what else you're getting from the imbalance, whether it's greater attacking chances, initiative. Don't only think about the material value of pawns and pieces on the board, because that will hinder your ability to play more creatively.
Master Damian Lemos, first of all, I hope you enjoyed this video. If you would like to receive more free chess videos from us, you can just click the subscribe button below. I would also highly recommend signing up for my free mail course, The 10 Grandmaster Secrets to Dominate Chess. During this exclusive course from onlinechesslessons.net, I'll share with you my own Grandmaster shortcuts to effective attacking, defending, and growth hacks to improving your chess without complicated books or memorization. So sign up by clicking the sidebar on the right, and I know you won't be disappointed. Once more, this is Damian for onlinechesslessons.net, and I'll see you in my videos. Thank you.